Some days don't feel strong. They don't feel inspired. They don't feel like progress. They feel heavy. They feel uncertain. And they feel like maybe you lost something. And that's the moment most people think something is wrong. But what if that moment is actually where the belief is built? Welcome back to Still Becoming. I'm your host, Bobby. And those of you that are new here, this show is about the process of growing, navigating life, chasing goals, and figuring out who we're becoming. Not when things are perfect, but while we're still in the middle of it. Before we jump into today's episode, I have to say thank you again, Jen Travis, for coming on the show and just, telling your story. For those of you that haven't heard it, you can head on over to the podcast and listen to it. It's a 40-minute episode, and it's, just detailing, where Jen's from. And, judging by the downloads that everybody is done and listened to it, I hope it hits home in the way that it hit me. Getting to that point where I'm always saying, hey, just the little things go a long way. And so, thanks again, Jen, for, giving me your time and giving those that were listening your time. And thank you again for everybody that tuned into it and everybody that's been listening to the show. I can't thank you enough. It's definitely amazing that, you're tuning in. As I say, building this show, I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart again. And hopefully, my mission here is to just help one, give someone a chance to hopefully, kind of feel inspired to chase your passion, and if you're enjoying the show, best way is simple. It's just to, follow on Instagram and, subscribe to wherever you're getting this podcast, continually just kind of subscribe and listen. And, hopefully take it to heart what I'm giving you. And if the Instagram address is Still Becoming 26, that's the handle there. You yourself, if you want to head on over to the YouTube channel as well, that's just recently been started. That is Still Becoming. There you'll find it, the icon. And if you yourself have any, shout out moments, you maybe don't want to shout them out on the platform for yours, or maybe you just want to extend that as well. It's something you're really proud of and chasing your passion. You can simply email at stillbecoming26@gmail.com. I love reading them. And, I just can't thank you enough. Anybody that is listening, leave a comment as well. You can definitely, give thanks to the show and let me know that, if there's anything that you feel that's touched you. And so as we get into the show, I'm excited for this one. This one is, as I'm heading into my marathon race week, there's definitely some points. If you've been following along on the Instagram, especially yesterday, I'm recording this on Saturday. So yesterday for my final Fast Friday, things just felt kind of extra heavy. Right now I'm at a point where I've done all the work and I kind of just want to get to it. And sometimes that notion of I want and it can't happen right now. And sometimes that can feel kind of just, how do I satisfy that? And, how do I feel just comfortable with that and telling myself like, look, we're fine. Sunday will come. There's no sense in rushing it. These workouts are important still. These small details leading up to that performance are still important. And I just want to, reiterate that, it's just about, kind of hanging in there and knowing that, that it's going to be okay, So, the show isn't about having it all figured out. It's about learning to keep moving forward anyways. And today's conversation is about one of the hardest parts of that. Again, title of the show is Trusting Yourself in the Dark. When it stops feeling good, lately I've been in one of those spaces where things don't feel the way I thought they would, not bad, not broken, just off. The rhythm that was there months ago suddenly feels quiet, and kind of why I chuckle there is just, that quiet feeling, it just hits the nail for me, like, oh, it's a little too quiet. I don't like it. I just want to get to the action, as many of you can relate. The confidence that showed up, that used to show up naturally, is harder to hear. My body feels a little achy, a little tired this past week, and my mind starts asking those questions. Did I do enough? Am I ready? Why doesn't this feel better? And if you've ever chased something that mattered to you, a race, a project, a career change, raising a family, rebuilding yourself, you probably know that feeling. Um, if it's a strange moment, it's that strange moment where the work is done, but the reassurance is gone. All that's left is trust. And that can feel, terrifying. That ledge where you're feeling like, I don't think this was the right choice. And I think that's just your nervous system, your conscience talking, kind of telling you, I'm scared of the unknown. And so maybe that wasn't the right choice, but I think if you just sit with it, that's the dark part I'm telling you, just sitting with it, because this isn't just about running. This shows up anywhere in life where effort doesn't immediately give you feedback. You try, you show up, you stay consistent, and there's no scoreboard telling you succeeded. There's nothing on a watch all the time that says, hey, congrats, you hit that mark. We're used to, processing, the process feeling loud. But real growth is usually very, very quiet, and quiet can feel like doubt if you don't understand what's happening. You kind of have to just take those moments for what they are. And, it may feel like everything's on fire and the ship's going down. But mostly we just kind of have to let that go. Don't hit the panic button yet. Just take a deep breath. Let the rest of the day carry out. Let the week carry out. Let whatever was going to be, going to be. I'm realizing that. When I'm learning from this moment right now, just because it feels dark, it doesn't mean that I'm lost. Sometimes it's dark because you've already left the place you started, and your eyes haven't adjusted yet. At some point, the journey stops being fueled by excitement and starts being carried by belief. Not belief that everything will be perfect, but belief that the work you did matters, even if it doesn't show up like proof. That work you did can feel like, I know I did it. I know I did that work. I know I did everything right, but why doesn't it feel different? And it's there, it's quiet, and it feels different because, everything's not on fire, and it just feels like this is how it should feel, calm. The waters are calm, call back to the last show I did, before Jen Travis's episode was, the invisible work. That was about showing up when motivation wasn't there. The part of the journey, that part of the journey is, just getting out there and resting, or, maybe not going on that extra mile, or taking that extra test that you didn't really need. This part of the journey is different. This is about standing still long enough to let that work kind of like catch up. It's no extra effort. It's no forcing, no trying to manufacture confidence. Just allowing yourself to say, I did what I could. And now I'm going to trust it. And, what this means, if, especially for me, what does this mean for me? If you're in one of those seasons right now, it might mean nothing is wrong. The discomfort you're feeling right now might not be failure. It might be transition. Maybe this is the part where you stop trying to prove and start following yourself to become it. Just steadier. A challenge I have for you, listener, if you're still, tuned in, here's something small I want to invite you into this week. I love doing these little challenges. I hope they help. I know they help me a lot. Don't add more work. Don't set a bigger goal because it's quiet. I know that can sometimes feel that place where you're like, it's not loud enough, and I'm used to it being loud, and that could be just panic that's making it loud. But like, don't set that bigger goal thinking it's going to get better. Just leave it as is. Don't try to fix how you feel. Just notice where you're already showing up. Look at your data. If you aren't keeping data, look at your journaling. Just look at it and notice. Even if you don't journal, which is a great activity to do, kind of remind yourself like we're on track, we're okay. It sounds silly. Some days I don't even want to do it. But, it just helps to reflect back so your head's not full of all these what if moments or just full of everything. Instead of asking, going back, when you're just showing up, instead of asking, is this working? Try asking, am I staying with it? I think a lot of times, we look at it and we say, all right, I'm gonna keep doing this thing. I'm gonna keep doing it, keep doing it. I've got my 30 days. Right now, for those of you that started your resolution back in January, again, you're like, oh, this, is this working? I got to change it up. When really, I think the question you should be asking is, am I staying with it? And if you are, I think that's a better question to ask and reflect upon is like, yeah, I am staying with it. That's awesome. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is remain. Not think of other things you can do, but just kind of remain still, remain calm, absorb that work. And so in closing, there will be seasons where growth feels, bright and obvious. And there will be seasons like this one, where it feels dim, where you question more, where you have to walk a little slower. That doesn't mean you're lost. It doesn't mean you've lost your way. It might mean you're learning to trust without needing constant proof, which I love that part. I'm learning that myself for this marathon build up again. I've done everything. I keep telling myself just trust the process. The workout I did yesterday was not by all means what I would call A+ work according to the data, or at least my watch and the splits. But the other data, I didn't spike. I didn't die. My mind was like, just focus on the effort, focus on just gliding. It doesn't matter what the time is. And I think that's the part of, all of this too, is just focus on the feeling of it. The dark isn't there to stop you. It's there to teach you that you can keep moving, even when you can't see that far ahead. So you're still moving, you're still trying, you are still becoming. And remember, you are the only one stopping you. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you next time.